Hi everyone, I'm Liam Eagle. I'm the editor here at the Web Host Industry Review, and I would like to welcome you all to another of our WHIR webinars. Today's session is called Making Cloud Infrastructure Enterprise Ready, and it's going to feature a presentation from Eric Hanselman, who is the Research Director for Networks at the 451 Group, and John Vincenzo, VP of Marketing at Embrane. So I'll let Eric and John introduce themselves a little more thoroughly in a moment, but before we go any further, I'd like to address a couple of housekeeping issues. First of all, questions. We're going to have some time at the end, about 10 minutes for questions from the audience. You can feel free to submit questions throughout the session, however, using the question function in the webinar software. I'll keep an eye on those throughout the session, but as far as actually putting the questions to the presenters, we're going to leave that until the very end. So if you do ask a question and it doesn't get answered because either we run out of time, maybe it's a bit too specific, or any other reason, rest assured that we will have a record of all the questions that were asked and who asked them. So somebody will reach out to you via email after the webinar. Or if you have a question that you'd rather ask outside of sort of a public forum like this, there will be some contact info on screen during the Q&A period, so you can definitely reach out directly that way. Of course, there will be a video archive of the webinar available as early as early next week. If you want to revisit a slide or a certain part of the presentation, or if you want to share it with somebody else, it will be in the archives at thewhir.com/webinars, and it'll be there alongside a lot of our other great past webinars, so definitely worth a perusal there. And again, this one will be up early next week. Without any further ado, let's get started, and I'll turn it over to Eric.
Thanks, Liam. For those of you who don't know me, this is Eric Hanselman, Research Director for 451 Networks. 451, if you don't know us, we're a global emerging technology analytics firm, and I'm going to be talking today about what's involved in making the shift to a cloud infrastructure for your typical enterprise. What are the concerns, and really sort of what are the next steps around that? So let me get the presentation fired up here, and we should be raring to go. All right, hopefully you can all see that introductory slide at this point.
Looks good.
Now, I'm sure you've all heard, a lot of the hype that's out there about the great beauty of clouds, and there's all sorts of reality behind the benefits that clouds can help to deliver. When it comes to the enterprise, there are all sorts of things that, when we look at cloud's advantages, everything from cost, the ability to really manage infrastructure cost in ways that are much more controllable, the ability to scale out, the ability to deliver agility in the way in which we manage both how our workloads are executing and where those workloads are executing. There's tremendous advantage to being able to take the capabilities that cloud offers and bring your typical enterprise application into environments that can leverage a lot of these big advantages. But there's some challenges in getting into those, and I'll go into those in the presentation. If we look at the market from the cloud operator service provider side, there's a huge amount of potential in cloud and cloud offerings, cloud as a service in a much broader range. These are just some market potential numbers that have come out of the 451's Market Monitor, the Cloudscape edition of Market Monitor. And it addresses both those kinds of applications that are running in SaaS and then cloud as a service. The SaaS model has seen very rapid adoption. Of course, there's a tremendous amount of utilization today, especially in the enterprise in areas such as the Salesforce model. Applications that are reasonably well contained and for the enterprise offer a migration path that's reasonably simple, as long as it fits in the enterprise's processes and procedures and the way in which they're typically utilizing application data. CRM is a fairly simple shift. There are a number of key areas in that space that also can offer some significant advantage. If you take a look at the cloud offering itself, that's a market that, while a little smaller, is growing substantially more quickly. And its growing and projected growth is headed in directions that are going at this scale because of the potential for taking this wealth of enterprise applications that are typically hosted internally, running in enterprise data centers, running in enterprise servers throughout the enterprise's infrastructure and bringing them into a cloud environment. This is a transition that ought to be able to happen and to leverage those advantages that cloud delivers. But as we've seen some of the data moving forward, it's not moving with the speed that it potentially could, and especially longer term. We start looking at where a lot of these markets are headed. This chart's from some ChangeWave data, one of the 451 divisions that does broad market survey. If we look at the data, we've been seeing that while there is significant growth of corporate utilization of cloud, it's been this march plateaus and moving, hitting plateaus and moving, primarily because there are a set of challenges to making that move to cloud deployments for your typical enterprise. Now, we've also seen a significant transition in the way in which enterprises view the cloud and view cloud capabilities. And we're in the midst of a shift in the way in which your average enterprise employs that. So, that shift is happening in the types of workloads that enterprises see as being suitable for cloudy deployments. We've come from a period in time where the expectation from the enterprise was that cloud was great for test and dev, little bits of project, odds and ends of things that weren't key core enterprise apps. And the market really reflected that in the transition. For applications that were already cloud ready, that migration was simple and straightforward. But for the bulk of key enterprise applications, the infrastructure to support that transition really hasn't been there. And we're in the midst of that transition right now as we move from an entirely public cloud world and what I think a lot of enterprises would label as private cloud, although that's an area it's a little fuzzy just simply because I think a lot of enterprises tend to classify virtualized environments as private cloud as well. But that next step is really a move towards an environment that starts to take advantage or starts to leverage capabilities that add sophistication to the cloud offerings that exist in the marketplace today. Those are capabilities that are going to allow your average enterprise to be able to make that migration with a minimum of fuss in order to leverage the capabilities and the advantages of that cloudy environment. As we move towards those capabilities, as cloud services and cloud offerings that are available to the enterprise start to mature, that's the point at which now critical applications in the business start to make that move. And that moves into potentially hybrid environments where core data sources wind up remaining, at least for the time being, within protected enterprise environments. All of those data sources that either the server hugger, data hugger, all those folks that really want to be able to pat those systems on the head when they go home at night can still remain in those capabilities, but that they also need to be able to put the front ends of those applications into cloudy capabilities. Eventually, all those data sources start to move out into cloud deployments, again, to be able to leverage the efficiencies there. And those are migrations that can only make that move when the capabilities within the cloud offerings mature enough to make that transition simple and straightforward for your typical enterprise. One of the things we've noticed in the enterprise, and this is some information from InfoPro and user surveys. This is a global 2,000 customer base or client base. We've seen, even as recently as a year ago, one of the principal concerns about transition to cloud has been security. But over this last year, we've seen that really become a much lesser concern as concerns around the actual complexity, the change needed to be able to make that move has really come to the fore. Security is something that has been addressed. We see PCI compatible clouds that are out there. We've seen cloud providers address a lot of the security aspects of protection of the data within those clouds on some level. There's a set of capabilities that are starting to mature in that space, and that's allowed enterprises to take a look at what that next step could be. And as a result, that shift starts to happen in terms of what they're actually viewing as the next step in making that move. So they're looking at things, if we look at the anecdotal data that comes along with the survey, it's a lot of concern about what do I have to do to my enterprise applications? Do I have to shift architectures? What do I have to do for retraining? What do I have to do to manage a lot of the compliance capabilities that go with those apps as we make the move? Exactly how complex is it to make that shift happen? The reality in the enterprise world is that the majority of applications were built without cloud deployment capabilities in mind. Unless it was a relatively recently developed application, it's not really built for the Amazon AWS world. I mean, there are all sorts of useful capabilities within Amazon, but the Amazon environment expects a certain application structure, and which is a good deal different than your typical enterprise deployment. That tiered, stratified, network insulated application deployment model is something that doesn't fit as easily into your typical cloud provider, at least the cloud general market cloud provider capabilities that are available today. In order to make the move, in order to open up that possibility that those enterprise applications can make that shift, there are a whole set of capabilities that need to be available that enable that typical enterprise architecture to move. It starts off with security capabilities for data protection, isolation of data, and it's not only storage of data, but also paths the data happens to traverse, and then the services that are typically available in your average enterprise infrastructure, things like load management, load balancing, load distribution, server management, those kinds of capabilities. And security functions, they're typically integrated within that infrastructure. So that's firewalling, management access, VPNing, all those kinds of things rolled into one. The concerns, because of this, that roll out of the enterprise are ones that really focus around the control of the overall application environment. So that's basic things such as management, all of the runbook integration pieces, how you actually live with that application, manage it, support the user community that runs on it. And then at much more higher levels, concerns about governance, regulatory, and compliance, the GRC issues. The GRC issues are something that are front and center in every enterprise's focus on that migration. When an application lives within those enterprise boundaries, the auditors for that that enterprise understand what those requirements are. They understand what the capabilities are. They understand what the deployment footprint looks like. When you start looking at a move towards a cloud deployment, that starts to raise concerns about what's necessary to be able to keep one's auditors happy about the location of the data. So outside of North America, there are all sorts of concerns about locality, and even in some cases within North America. Taking a look at where the application itself and the application data paths are located. So concerns about noisy and nosy neighbors. So are you running on shared infrastructure? Is that actual production application going to be in an environment where the data or the paths the data traverse are going to be shared with other tenants within that environment? And then, of course, from the application delivery perspective, how's that application going to perform? How do I manage how the application performs? And how do I control and manage SLAs around the delivery of that application performance to my end users? The Cloud Security Alliance has got a great line about what this process is all about. And their comment is that it's the process of losing control gracefully while maintaining accountability. And for your average enterprise, that's really that key step to making sure that the underlying capabilities to support the application and to support a lot of those concerns are in place in order to make that transition happen. And that's something where managing the way in which that transition happens translate into the costs associated with actually going to the cloud in order to take advantage of what are potentially better cost models once you get there. But of course, those eventual benefits have to outweigh the transition costs to allow an enterprise to justify that transition. When we look at what's necessary from a cloud operator side to be able to provide those enterprise class capabilities, we've gotten really good in terms of cloud operation for being able to run at scale. The orchestration capabilities for compute and storage have moved forward along the same kinds of models that we typically identify, and the way in which we deploy applications, the way in which we spin up capacity, and the way we offer that to cloud subscribers. At 451's HCTS conference last week, for our operators panel, the one key issue that people were identifying in terms of scale out was network. Network was identified as the elephant in the room in terms of automation and orchestration. Being able to scale out for compute, but you've also got the growth of the network deployment capabilities. Networking has to be able to scale it that same way that compute and storage does. Otherwise, you've got to make compromises in the way in which you architect the infrastructure that's supporting it. It's got to be able to be automatable. It's got to be able to be spun up in the same ways we spin up compute and storage instances in order to support the capabilities that are out there. To take a look at what a typical operator has to do to be able to meet those enterprise requirements, of course, the big core concern is managing costs in the process of creating these extra capabilities. It's a relatively straightforward path to deploy enterprise class hardware, to be able to take the various levels of infrastructure capability and roll those out as typical deployment platforms. Take the firewalls, load balancers, all the typical things you find in enterprise, take those same branded devices, roll them out into the infrastructure, and off you go. That, of course, has some operational costs. It starts very basically in that you wind up dedicating equipment to be able to provide those services, and that's a step function in terms of what you've got to be able to do to make that capability exist. You're buying a platform, you're building boxes, you're getting those into rack environments. That's something that can potentially create some concerns. And of course, there's the speed with which you can deploy new systems. How long does it take to rack and stack those physical systems to get them in there? What's the management capability of those systems? What do you have to do that integration? Now, there are systems out there that will allow you to minimize what that step function in capital cost is. A number of vendors that are offering capabilities that may help to moderate some of that initial CapEx push. But still, you've got all the operational issues around that. And really, when you wind that out fully, it does give you some loss of flexibility in terms of how you address it. So there are a number of different ways that operators are looking at handling this. One of the ones that gets a lot of play today is software-defined networking. It delivers, depending upon the particular platform, they're both proprietary and open mechanisms for virtualizing network capabilities. And a lot of those are getting more sophisticated. They're starting to catch up with the compute and storage options that are out there. If we look at the networking capabilities in the various hypervisor platforms that are out there, they're gaining significantly in sophistication. Not only the basic interconnection capabilities, but also some of the services that can be layered on top of them. You look at the vSwitch and distributed vSwitch capabilities in VMware. That gives some interesting ways to be able to start to automate that interconnection process, to be able to tie in internal virtual networks with the instances that we're spinning up and the ways in which they're connected to them. The one interesting part about the SDN approach to this is that it does also give some transitional capabilities to be able to go from the relatively simple hardware integrated networking capabilities that you typically see in deployment to be able to now extend some of those in ways that give you some flexibility across platforms, across server infrastructures, to be able to step a little further apart. It means that you don't have to make a hard transition from a fully hardware integrated network connectivity environment. There are a couple things you have to manage in terms of those interconnection processes. VLAN management starts to be something that you've got to be taking careful note of. But the automation capabilities are significant, and they're a good step up from a just simply an integrated hardware capability that's out there today. If we take a look at the way in which data center build-out is addressing these and taking advantage of both hardware and software networking capabilities, when you start looking at being able to meet the GRC requirements of your typical enterprise, you've got to start looking at more sophisticated ways of architecting that deployment. And if we look at the way in which typical data center operators have handled this today, the most simple and straightforward, the option that's going to go keep auditors happy from a range of different customers is partitioning. It's deploying individual pods of equipment, isolating traffic, isolating the capabilities for one particular customer, and being able to partition that in ways that you can some assurance controls in the environment aren't shared and manage that directly. Of course, there's tremendous amount of sunk cost associated with that. There's also a loss of flexibility when you make that kind of move. So while that can be attractive for certain types of customers where price points start to make some sense, it's clearly not the path for everybody. If we look at virtualized systems, there are a range of solutions from virtualized appliances. They've got the ability to be able to give some capability for load balancing or firewalling, security capabilities that move with the virtualized instance. So you spin up the instance, you spin up a virtual appliance for a load balancer, for example, and manage that in a separate integrated capability. The difficulty, though, is that you're then having to manage the appliance itself, as well as some limitations today in a lot of the native capabilities for both the virtualization platforms and some of the appliance-based instances that are out there today. And the benefits, of course, of being able to get to an enterprise-ready cloud can be significant for enterprise in that they can take advantages of all those great cost capabilities of cloud to be able to do scale through cloud. So all these things make tremendous sense from an enterprise. And they make sense from the service provider's perspective as well, to be able to open up new markets to enterprises that might be hesitant to move your typical application infrastructure forward. For the service provider, of course, you've got to make sure you track operational efficiency to be able to manage that. You can do that at some reasonable scale if you can do that effectively. And there's additional service revenue for the additional capabilities to get those cloud offerings enterprise ready that can both increase customer stickiness as well as adding revenue for the capabilities above and beyond a generic offering. Ways to be able to differentiate services beyond the sort of generic cloud offerings that are in the marketplace today. I mean, there's tremendous possibility out there. The future in the longer term is definitely cloudy. The benefits, I think, in the long term are hard to avoid, but there is some work to be able to get those enterprise workloads out into your typical cloud deployment, certainly based on where we are today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to John.
All right, thanks, Eric. Let me just do the technical portion of our show, which is try to give you access to it. All right. Hopefully everybody can see that. First of all, let me thank everybody for attending today's webinar. For those of you who I haven't talked to in the past, my name is John Vincenzo. I've been in marketing for the better part of 20 years, predominantly in the telecom and networking space. So when I had an opportunity to hear about what the folks at Embrane were building and seeing the trends in the market about where things were going from a agility in cloud infrastructure standpoint, I jumped at the chance to join Embrane, and I'm very excited about what we're doing here. There's a lot I could talk about in terms of Embrane and what we do and how we do it, but I really want to focus on a couple of points that Eric emphasized during his presentation. One is about how do you unlock the bottleneck of the cloud, which is the network, and how do we make the network on par in terms of, or even exceed in terms of agility when it comes to the cloud versus standard compute and storage. And then the other element I want to talk about is a little bit about the enterprise class services via dedicated instances or dedicated services. So I think that's a critical element as we start to try and help cloud service providers in particular but enterprises as well, migrate from a more shared environment to a dedicated enterprise class environment. So with that, let me start with a quick introduction of Embrane, who we are. I'll go into some of the more details about how we do and what we do later, but just to give you a sense from the start about who is Embrane. Embrane has built the industry's first multi-service software platform that dynamically scales out to power any virtual network services on demand. Now that's a mouthful, I understand that, so let me kind of break it down in a couple key areas just to give you a sense of what we're doing. The first point I want to make is it's a software platform, so it's a complete software-based platform, not a hardware one. The second piece is it's a multi-service platform, so that means we can run multiple services on one platform. It's not an individual device or an individual product for each service. It's all run on one platform. The notion of scale out means high performance. It's the ability to support enterprise class applications at a high rate. Typically, the software that's available today has not been able to do that, so we've built an architecture that allows you to scale out for enterprise class services. And then the notion of network services, I want to be clear about what I mean by that, which is, if you think about the network stack, we focus on application-centric services such as server load balancing, firewall, VPN, SSL termination, etc. That's really around layer 4.7 in the stack. So that's where our focal point is. Primarily, we're focused in talking to service providers. They are further ahead in terms of enterprise adoption. They are further ahead in building out infrastructure. They've already gone through a lot of the pain and have recognized what needs to be done to build a cloud infrastructure. There are enterprises who are also building cloud infrastructure as a service models for more of a IT as a service in-house. I think they're fewer and further between when it comes to where they are in the adoption cycle than service providers. One interesting point to note, and Eric talked about this adoption cycle and the learning curve as one of the concerns. Historically, service providers have followed what the enterprises have done. Enterprises have taken the lead. They've established architectures and processes and services in-house, and then the service providers built their business around how do I support that and replicate that in my environment to support the enterprise. What's happening we see in the cloud today is more service providers are actually taking the lead. They're further along, and I think what's going to happen is enterprises are going to learn and watch what service providers are doing and try and replicate that internally. So not to put any pressure on the service providers out there, but I think enterprise adoption is also going to be taking a cue from what service providers are doing. So that's a little bit about Embrane at a high level. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about product-specific things that we're doing a little later. But I wanted to kind of set the stage for the introduction of who we are. Before I start talking about solutions and products, I think it's important to take a step back and say, what problem are we really solving? What challenges are we trying to address? And in talking to hundreds of service provider customers over the past couple of years, everybody has different challenges or has challenges that they're trying to address, but you can really lump them into three categories. The first one is, how do I acquire more customers? How do I bring more business in-house? And how do I do that as quickly and as often as possible? At the same time, once I have those customers, how do I create a level of stickiness? How do I build automation and allow for self-service and differentiation that will make my customer lifespan longer with me? The next thing is around doing so through new services. And that can take a couple different forms. That can be absolutely new services that haven't been offered before by either the service provider or the industry. It could be how do I increase feature velocity, so with services I do have, how quickly can I get them up and running faster? And then there's also a notion of, if I have services, can I provide more different levels and different tiers of service to give me an opportunity to kind of stay with the customer through the life and grow the customer relationship? And then last but not least is, if that wasn't hard enough, how do I, to maintain customers, grow customers, and offer new services, how do I do that in a profitable manner? How do I do that with reduction of capital expenses, and how do I make it not operationally complex where it's going to cost me more or my margins are going to be lower? We all operate with margins and want to create as high a margin as possible for us while providing value to the customer, of course. And how do I do that efficiently? So regardless of how they phrase it, they typically fall into those three buckets of challenges that you're trying to address. Now, when I think about it from a cloud infrastructure standpoint, you look at it and say, do the products I either have already today or that are available to me really address these challenges? Well, let's take them one by one. when I think about compute, certainly compute is much further along in terms of the virtualization of applications and the ability to do that in the products that are available to me. Storage, also, you go to cloud service portals for service providers, and the ability to do automated service, self-service for storage is also pretty prevalent, and you have options available to you. Unfortunately, when you come to the network, and again, particularly around network services, that level of agility, the ability to rapidly provision, to elastically grow and shrink, to bill or pay for only what I use or what I sell, those elements don't necessarily exist today. And there's a variety of reasons. If you look at it from a hardware perspective, that's fairly rigid, very capital intensive, by nature not elastic. It's hardware, it doesn't grow or shrink. And a lot of service providers have tried to make do with hardware options, and they've done the best they can, but it's really not going to get you the best level of customer satisfaction, new services offerings, or profitable revenue growth. On the software side, you address some of the agility issues, but then you find yourself with a level of operational complexity and the need to do much more granular capacity planning for each customer. So not exactly what you want to do and not what you think about when it comes to the cloud. That being said, let me talk a little bit about how to virtualize, building cloud infrastructure for the enterprise and virtualizing those network services for the cloud. Today, with the options available to you, you typically will see two kinds of service tiers, two basic kinds of service tiers. The first is I take a product at each level of service. So each network service that I want to offer as a service to my customer, I take an individual product and I build that into my infrastructure, or I deploy that as part of my infrastructure. And it's basic, it's shared, it's good for development and tests, and I could probably charge anywhere from giving it away to $50 a month, and that typically is what we see in terms of how much people are pricing for this. They usually are hardware-based solutions that deliver these kind of shared services. To get into the dedicated conversation, which is more enterprise class, I have to deploy several different other products, and they could be from the same vendor, but they're different products. And I can offer them each as, and these typically come in the form of software appliances, virtual appliances from software vendors. And they can, they tend to be more valuable, so you can actually charge at a higher level because enterprise is more geared towards an enterprise. But they're different products, and that transition from shared to dedicated is very difficult to do. If I take the dedicated example, I look at a specific a use case for enterprise dedicated services on a server load balancer, for example. My first year cost for servers, licenses, support costs could be north of $500,000, and that's for no more than 250 type customers. So the idea there is it's a cost that's pretty expensive, $500,000 that I have to pay for before I see any revenue, and I'm losing money for basically the first year. By the time I get to year 4, I start to see some gains from that, and I maintain a decent margins of 30%, but it took me 4 years to get to that point. And that's, by the way, assuming that I've done very good capacity planning by each customer to make sure that I got the right licenses from the right vendor to be able to do that. So just to give you a sense that that notion of a dedicated service is pretty complex, and it also has a lot of expense to it. It takes a while to achieve a return on it. That's where Helios comes in, and that's the product that Embrane has built. The distributed software platform from Embrane is called Helios, and we've built it to address kind of the shortcomings of both the hardware and the software virtual appliances. We've done it to try and bridge the gap between the two. And essentially, and I'll keep this high level about what we do, and I can explain more to anybody who wants some more detail about it. But essentially, Helios is a software platform that runs on any x86 server, so any server, doesn't matter what vendor it comes from. Using virtualization technology, we extract compute power from the pool, and we create these virtual containers called the distributed virtual appliances in which we can operate services. And they come in, they all run on the same pool. It could be a load balancer, firewall, VPN, SSL. Those are all services that Embrane offers today. And all that is done and created and orchestrated through what we call an Elastic Services Manager. Internally, it's affectionately known as your virtual procurement office, because you send a command from the service manager to create these services, and they're up and running within minutes. and I can grow and shrink those on demand in seconds. And because it comes on a pool, as I can take capacity from anywhere on the pool, any host on the pool, to offer these highly scalable services. The other piece of the puzzle, and when you think about the cloud, one of the key elements is about programmability. Well, each of both the DVAs and the ESM, the Elastic Services Manager, come with REST APIs, which means I can integrate this much more effectively into my either existing or soon-to-be created orchestration tool and portal, as well as my billing system. So it's very flexible to be able to offer cloud infrastructure in an automated self-service kind of way. We also have we innovated on the product side to be able to scale at the levels of hardware and the dynamic nature of the cloud, but we also innovated on the business side by creating a very flexible business model or sales licensing model that allows you to do things like pay as you sell. If you don't know how many customers you have or the amount of capacity you're going to use, why not start paying for things until you sell the services? So rather than if you build it and pay for it, they will come. When they come, you pay for it and you bill for it. So that gives you some flexibility there. And then the other thing is it enables both the shared and dedicated services. So I think back to my example about service tiers now. If I deploy a Helios solution, I take one platform, I run all my services off it, load balancer, firewall, VPN, SSL, and I can offer the same type of basic shared service and charge accordingly to my customer. Now here's where the beauty comes in, particularly around the network services side. I suddenly have many more options to choose from, and I can get as granular as I want to do. I can offer dedicated services, for example, with instance uptime, and I can put a guarantee around it because I have granular control over these DVAs or the services. And so I can start there and say I have $100 a month I want to charge. And I can do that. Okay, how about a dedicated service instance with throughput guarantees? Well, I can charge a little bit more for that for the enterprise because they're getting a lot more value out of it. I have burst options. If somebody wants the ability to do burst capabilities because I'm doing a marketing event and things are going well, I can give them the ability to grow and shrink that dynamically on demand, and I can offer, start charging for that as well. And then because of the nature of the scale-out performance, I can grow a high performance, a premier performance tier, where I can start charging even more for those services. The idea here is you get a lot more flexibility. I can offer it on the same platform. I have upsell opportunities as a business. I can take them from shared to dedicated. I can take them from different tiers within the dedicated environment, and I give a lot more flexibility to as a customer, as a service provider, but also to my customers. To kind of close out, I think one of the things that if you take one thing away from this is, I wanted to look at this not only from a technology perspective, but at the end of the day, what benefits is the Helios platform driving to both service providers, but also to their end user customers, because that's where the rubber meets the road. So let's start first. Rapid provisioning and elasticity is one of the key benefits of the Helios solution. The ability to provision and procure a service in 2 minutes, pretty impressive given what in a cloud environment. And the ability to grow and shrink in seconds as needed is very compelling. But that translates into real-life results for service providers. I get a faster time to revenue. I can turn services up and get them up and running and start charging for them instantaneously. I have competitive differentiation. I can actually do something that people can't do, and my customers are going to be a lot happier because I have a lot more flexibility, and they can kind of grow with them as their business business needs dictate, I should say. On the end user side, I get a faster time to service. I want something, I want it now, I can deploy it, and I can run it in real time, and I can do it all from the self-service model. So I don't have to plan as hard. When it comes to dedicated instances, I can do new enterprise class services as a service provider with a lot of upsell opportunities and additional revenue opportunities through tiers. One thing I want to talk about along these dedicated side, I did the comparison of a virtual appliance. Compare that same environment of about 250 customers using a dedicated load balancer solution from Embrane for the same cost for the servers, the management tool, and the throughput. Your upfront costs in year one or your costs in year one are now $150,000 versus over $500,000 for it. And then I also, which is really key here, is I can actually see a return on investment, a positive return on investment that first year. But I don't have to wait for 4 years to start to see a gain. I get that right from day one. And I can run after 4 years when I'm seeing margins of 71%. So because I can offer dedicated instances with this, I am making money. I am making money profitably. I'm offering new services, and my customers are getting production-ready environments. They don't have the noisy or nosy neighbor problem, and then they can also get better, stronger SLAs as part of their agreements. Multi-service platform, I talked a little bit about this, the ability to run multiple services on this, lowers the cost from a capital perspective. I get multiple opportunities as I add more services to the platform, so I get future revenue opportunities, and I've taken the complexity out of how do I do this for each of these services right out of play. On the enterprise side, more service options, it's consistent across, I know exactly what I'm dealing with in each service that I'm offering, and I can migrate very easily across those services. And then finally, again, I mentioned the notion of flexible licensing. We have an aggregate bandwidth pricing model for our customers, for cloud service providers, which means I get to buy wholesale rather than buy retail. I don't have to buy and understand each individual customer and their capacity needs. I can buy it wholesale and then distribute that amongst my clients. So I get wholesale pricing versus retail pricing, the pay-as-you-sell, and it's more of a keyless model, so I don't have to worry about transitions and keys should capacity needs change. And then finally, on the end user side, faster time to service. I've got multiple options, and that transition leaves me with no service disruption. So much more friendly user experience to address those needs. So I've given kind of my 15 minutes of fame, a Reader's Digest version, if you will, of Embrane and what we're trying to provide. I'm happy to talk more about that, but hopefully that gives you an understanding of how Embrane is unlocking that bottleneck and allowing you as service providers to be able to offer enterprise-class network services as a service and monetize them.
All right, thanks, John. So I've got, well, I'd like to remind everyone that we've got some time here for questions, so if you have questions, please feel free to submit them now. We got a few questions while you guys were presenting, so I'm going to try to go through some of that right now. Somebody mentioned right after Eric finished that when you were addressing some of the sort of tactics for building out cloud solutions, you didn't really mention, open source, open standard infrastructure platforms like OpenStack. There wasn't really a question there, but I'd like to try to turn that into a couple of questions. One is, do you guys think that, I guess, how do you think something like OpenStack or open source cloud software in general, how does that play into the idea of enterprise cloud? I mean, is that something that enterprises are wary about? Do they want sort of, do they want specific components? How does that look to you guys?
Well, I'll jump in to start. OpenStack gives all sorts of great capabilities around storage and compute spin-up. The OpenStack Quantum project is still kind of getting its feet underneath it in terms of networking capability, but there's a ton of promise there in terms of what it can offer. But when you line that up with your typical enterprise, the enterprises are still really trying to figure out how they stand up their own cloud capabilities and how they integrate with those capabilities. I mean, OpenStack is really a service provider, primarily a service provider platform today. If you look at most of the deployments, if you look at sort of where it's headed. Down the road, will enterprises be utilizing OpenStack? Yeah, absolutely. And the capabilities that Quantum provides, the primitives that are available within Quantum to be able to do network orchestration alongside compute and storage, they're definitely doing interesting things as we go down the road. There are a range of different both proprietary and open plugins for Quantum to spin up networking capabilities, and I'm sure as time goes on there'll be more in that space as well.
Okay, great. So John, I guess for the Helio platform, for instance, I mean, does that rely on any particular compute choices that you make, or any platform choices that you make relative to computer storage?
No, it's actually been built. That's a good question, Leo. I mean, it's actually been built to not have to not be restricted by choices enterprises or service providers have already made. I mean, the idea is any server platform, for example, any hypervisor. It doesn't matter what it is. The idea is we know that this transition is going to take some time, so we want it to be able to interoperate in both existing and legacy kind of environments as well as this more new cloud environment. So, Helios is purpose-built for the cloud, but it's built to also interoperate in a more traditional environment as well. So, no, the short answer is no. It does not tie to any one particular product or hardware, architecture. It's been built to eliminate that as an issue.
Yeah, the thing that I found interesting about it is the fact that you guys have built it as virtual instances, so that wherever you want to spin up that instance, whatever that platform is, off and away you go.
Yep, exactly.
So I'm curious at how in your experience or in the experience of either one of you guys really, in terms of the service provider purchasing choices that enterprises are making, the kind of network orchestration possibilities that you guys are presenting here, how much do those figure into those purchasing decisions right now?
Well, a lot of it, I don't know, John, I'll jump in to start. A lot of it is really how an enterprise utilizes cloud. And today you see a lot of folks dabbling in test and dev. The difficulty in that process, though, is that you can go out and spin up a whole bunch of AWS AMIs, but that you get your feet underneath you. You got dev teams that are doing all sorts of good stuff in that front. But if you did all the spin up in one particular environment, and that environment doesn't happen to meet the requirements of your production operations, now you're stuck, and you've got to do a whole bunch of work to go to rebuild, re-architect the application. Hey, wow, it worked great, in this handful of little AMIs. Well, then, the security team took a look at it and said, okay, we got a firewall here, we got to, in order to keep our compliance capabilities, we've got to have firewalls here and here. Well, in order to scale out, we've got to build load management into these pieces of it. If you have to transition, then it means that you've burned a lot of development cycle, both standing up the initial instance of the application and then having to go redesign it into whatever the production environment happens to be. So that winds up potentially being a stumbling block. The challenge is being able to create environments where that transition from development actually mirrors all the capabilities that you've got going forward.
Eric, that last part is something I wanted to touch on, because I can give you an example of a customer, an enterprise customer that we were talking to, who recognizes the value of the cloud. And one of the challenges that they had as application developers, and let's face it, by the way, it's all about the applications. As they were developing it, they do all their development, all their tests, and when they get ready to move it to production, they realize they haven't done anything with network services on it. So they haven't attached any network services, so they've done all that work. So the environment that they move it towards does not mirror what they tested in. So they run into problems on the application side, because there's no way to date to be able to do that transition from shared to dedicated seamlessly, to be able to give them the network services environment on the test side, and then move that same environment, that same kind of capabilities over to a development environment. And they ran into a whole bunch of problems with it, which is why they were looking at something like Helios to address it.
Okay, so here's a question then. Is there an education that has to take place from the service provider to the enterprise saying, these are tools that you need, or is it so tied to performance guarantees and to things like that you don't really need to educate them about it? Or is it a matter of just saying, here's what's causing you pain right now, and here's how we're going to solve it?
Yeah, this is John. I'll jump in a little bit and then turn it to Eric. It goes back to one of the things, there is a learning curve that needs to happen. It goes back to one of the things that I kind of talked about when I just talked about the progression of cloud adoption from cloud service providers to enterprises. Cloud service providers are actually leading that charge, and they're learning a lot, and they're going to be sharing a lot of those lessons with the enterprise. So it's important that cloud service providers do understand that enterprises are maybe dipping their big toe in the water, but before they dive in head first, they're going to need to learn a lot of the lessons. At the same time, service providers have an opportunity to monetize some of these services as they deliver value to the enterprise customer, so it's a win-win for both. I can help the enterprise understand what they need to do from an internal standpoint to be able to fit in a cloud environment, and as a service provider, I'm going to provide a lot more value to those customers and grow my business.
Yeah, but I mean, John, and your last points I think are really sort of key on that. I mean, Liam, to your question, there's a ton of education that needs to happen. The transition to cloud is happening the same way the transition to virtualization happened. It's the same kind of deal. People sort of dipped their toes in the water, sort of tried to figure out what they could do. If you look at the application components in this transition, very similar kinds of stuff. Yeah, we can put the web servers into a virtualized environment because we can make lots of them. Well, guess what? People are doing the same things in cloud, and you still have that same reticence of, oh no, we're not going to put the database, on the into the cloud because that's who knows what will happen in terms of performance. Well, people got over that hurdle of building virtualized database servers, and they're in the process of getting over that. Same sort of concerns with other application components in cloud deployments. But the big overhang in this is helping enterprises understand what the different capabilities are, and understand that, yes, if you want to move into a cloud environment, you need that supporting infrastructure to be able to make that step and still have applications that perform well, and more importantly, applications that meet all of your compliance needs at the same time.
Okay, so I have one more question that I've sort of marked down here now. In light of the sort of cloud market evolution that you were describing earlier on in the presentation, Eric, I'm curious, the stage that you placed us in right now was the sort of transitional phase between test and dev and putting actual important production applications into the cloud, right? So is there an infrastructure requirement from the service provider standpoint that says this is the kind of infrastructure that is needed at the transitional point, or do they just need the finished stuff?
No, there are infrastructure components to be able to enable that shift to happen, to enable enterprises to make that jump. It's just simply standing up the ability to have self-service, compute storage, a little bit of networking chucked in there is a necessary first step. But you've got to be able to have levels of all of the infrastructure services that are necessary to make that shift a simple one for enterprise. If you're just standing up your basic sort of OpenStack environment, with reasonable capabilities, good capacity, great user interfaces, the difficulty in that space is that it is continuing to get harder and harder to differentiate those offerings from a lot of the other capabilities that are out there. This is a place in which service providers can really differentiate themselves by having the infrastructure elements that enterprises require to be able to move real production workloads into that sort of capability. And I draw back to the step to virtualization. In the early days, virtualized platforms didn't have a lot of those key enterprise infrastructure components. And so people started spinning up, full-blown virtual appliances to handle some of that. And then eventually the capabilities within the platforms matured. And in a lot of cases, virtualization platforms have a lot of the capabilities that intrinsically that are necessary to build out enterprise applications. We see that same place in cloud right now. The reality is it's relatively easy to stand up a very simple cloud service offering today. There are a lot of vendors out there, a lot of platforms, both for pay and open source capabilities. The next step is providing levels of sophistication within those environments that give a typical enterprise the tools they need to make that jump from a virtualized implementation to a cloudy one. Okay,
and John, we haven't, and we're getting pretty close to the hour, so maybe we'll wrap up after this question. But we have another question from the audience, which is, it's specifically about Helios, and I guess the person asking the question is sort of understood the benefits you were saying of virtualizing those network services, but wasn't certain what Helios was offering that was unique in an environment where you can already get software implementations of things like firewall, load balancer, etc. Can you explain a little more about what's being virtualized and what's unique?
Well, yeah, sure, and that's a good question. You know, the bottom line is Helios gives you the performance levels of hardware and the agility of software solutions. So the idea of Helios is I can spin up a firewall or load balancer or VPN in a minute. I can grow and shrink that firewall or VPN or load balancer or fill in the blank network service in 30 seconds. I can, you know, go 8 times in a minute. I mean, the ability and the agility that Helios gives you is not available today in other software versions of products. It's also the ability to scale because I'm running across a pool of hardware, a pool of servers. As capacity is needed, if a device reaches max capacity, I can draw on compute power from another server in that pool, and I can assign it. So I could essentially be running a load balancer using compute capacity from multiple hosts. If I, in a software version of that, when I were to, if I were to do that, if I ran out of capacity on a device, I'd have to bring another device up, a separate device up and running, that's a larger device that has more capacity, and migrate that service over to that new device, which is very, very disruptive. Another element that is key, and I talked about a little bit about it, but is the notion of programmability. It's not a nice to have in the cloud. It's a have to have. You have to be able to programmatically integrate within existing environments, new portals, custom portals, open source portals, whatever tools, whatever it is, you have to be able to integrate. And hardware and software solutions today don't allow for that to happen. We've built Helios with REST APIs that allow you to seamlessly integrate into those different environments and give you flexibility to actually build a full-on agile data center rather than piece parts along the way. I hope that makes sense. I'm happy to go more detail about it, but I think that's kind of the quick and dirty version of what's, what we do and what's not available from competitive products.
And John, the one thing I'd add to just emphasize that one last point, which is that it's a single management interface for all of the instances. It allows you to step beyond the management task of managing a whole bunch of individual virtual appliances. You've got a single interface that stands up services across that infrastructure rather than having to manage a whole bunch of individual instances of virtual appliances that they get scattered along with the application build-outs that you generate.
No, that's a good point. And to build on that is you can also run all these services on one platform. I don't have to use different products that I have to buy separately, that I have to license separately, that I have to manage and determine and monitor, that don't automate. All that stuff has to be done on an individual product-by-product basis by each network service. If there is actually a software-based version of it available, I can do it all on Helios today on one platform.
Okay, well, that might be a great note to end on if you guys are all set.
No, I think that's great. If I could just say thanks to everybody, Eric, you in particular, Liam, and all the attendees for being here. Hopefully you learned a bit about where we are from an industry standpoint, but also a little bit about Embrane, and I think Eric and I are both available to answer questions offline if need be.
Great. And Liam, thanks for hosting. I appreciate it, and appreciate all the time people have spent with us today.
Okay. I'd like to, reiterate that thanks, but maybe I'll leave it at that. Of course, Eric and John offered some pretty great insight into a pretty important topic facing the hosting industry right now, and I would also like to remind everyone that the archive of this webinar will be online next week at thewhir.com/webinars. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.